And we can go ahead and start at 10 a.m. if that works for everyone. And if Michael can join us, he'll join us. Michael Welsh, that is.
I saw him at the grocery store on Sunday, and he planned on being with us. So.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to the WIDA conference this, so I'll see him this week in Appleton. So that'll be good.
That's great.
Yeah. So the minutes, I don't know if anyone had any questions on that. They were fairly brief. Okay. And then we'll get right into, there he is. We'll get right into new business. Mark, do you want me to stop sharing my screen so you can kind of do your thing?
Sure.
With the review draft redevelopment Q&A and outreach plan?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Mark, you sound a little rough too.
Yeah, like something in my throat. I think it's allergies.
That's what we were just saying.
Yeah,
we all have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone's always terrified in what they got, and it's, oh yeah, it's in the end of September. I get it now. It's happened every year for the last 20.
It was on the news that we have the largest crop of ragweed in the history of the state.
Oh,
no wonder I'm so miserable.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you can see my screen hopefully right now.
Yep.
Yep.
And I'm going to just rumble through this question response document, and then I'm going to send it to you all and give you a few days to chew on it and get me any comments you have back. I had hoped to get this done in time or in advance of the meeting, and it just didn't happen. So I guess the idea was that, this is complicated. It's easy to misunderstand what we are doing and what we aren't doing. And that especially as we move forward with the process, it'll be important for all of us, for the CDA and for the community to kind of be on the same page as to what's happening with this redevelopment planning process and what could happen. And I think the idea would be that, first off, I want to make sure that we've got good questions here now and good responses. And secondly, I think the idea would be that as we move forward with this process, that this document would evolve and we'd have, other questions as they actually came up in the public and were sort of relevant to where we were in the process.
I think, hey, Mark.
Yeah.
The audience for this is really anyone who asks, but I think it's a good audience is to the CDA and the village board itself too, to kind of understand, don't you think?
I definitely think so. But as and certainly as communicators to the public, to make sure that we're delivering, clear and consistent messages that are accurate. Okay. And also, so people understand in the public what we are doing. And, so I guess the audience, I would say, is the forest residents, but to the extent that, you all and the CDA and the village board, need this information to understand and to communicate. I think that's important too.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So I'm not going to go through every word of this because I think that's not a real productive use of our time. So again, I will promise to send this off to you right after we meet today, and then give you maybe till Friday to comment on this. But I think the general idea is that we would, working with Michelle and maybe Corey, that we start to develop a kind of a web page that would have information relevant to the process that people can access, and that every bit of public information that we have would be posted on that page for people to look at. So it starts with what is redevelopment planning, talking about the relationship to properties developed a while ago and maybe have experienced some decline in condition. And then I have a question of why are we doing this in DeForest, and perhaps the answer, and you can be the judge, is a little wonky, but it gets back to many of the goals within the comprehensive plan securing a strong tax base, increasing vibrancy of downtown, growing the economy. And then I have additional commentary is that redevelopment planning, is a smart way to the village to grow because it makes use of existing infrastructure. It guides investments to where people are already living and spending time, and if it helps preserve farmland and open spaces on the edge, and manages how much growth is needed there. So the first page is really about why are we doing this, and that kind of thing. We talked about this graphic is from the comp plan survey, within which we had, as I mentioned at the last meeting, really strong support for, certainly revitalization in the downtown area, as amorphous as that can be. And then we've also heard at our community meetings for the comp plan, similar levels of support for that type of activity, and people starting to pinpoint some ideas. And for those of you plugged into that comp plan promise, I've got the results almost done. We just need a final bit of missing information, and then those will be released in the next couple of days. And then we just kind of try to define terms here, this notion of redevelopment, not necessarily meaning the bulldozer coming out and leveling neighborhoods. In fact, it doesn't mean that. And, how does it happen? I think, people's maybe fear or concern is that the government is going to come in and buy up all the land. And that's, again, usually not how it happens. And so that I wanted to make sure to communicate through this somehow. Order of things maybe could be use some TLC, but I do have a question about what's in it for property owners here. That there are some opportunities, that being in a redevelopment area isn't sort of the mark of death. That there's been many properties that have been in a redevelopment area since 1994 within the village. That it doesn't compel you to do anything with your property if you are in a redevelopment area. I'm kind of bouncing around here, but this is number 9. The big question is, can somehow the government confiscate my land? And the first response to that is no one can the word taking is a horrible word. No one can take your property. It implies that you're just going to be kicked out on the street, and no one will give you any money for it. You can't do that without fair compensation. If you need to relocate, then the government wants to buy your property. They have to pay you for relocation. The laws have gotten really strict, appropriately so, because we did go through a time in the 1960s in particular where there was a lot of, we're going to build this freeway here, sorry, goodbye, kind of activity going on. And the laws got really tight in response to that. So, I think this is good to hover on here. First, no one can take without fair compensation. Secondly, I don't know, and I can try to find out from Al, who's got the best history, whether the village has ever purchased or acquired a property against the interest or the will of a property owner. It's almost always everywhere nowadays a willing seller. Ultimately, it would be up to the village board to decide whether to acquire land. And as you can imagine, if there's not a willing seller, that's not a very popular thing. So you don't see that very often. I saw it one time recently in Fitchburg. They had a road project that was a pretty important road, and they went through eminent domain to acquire the road. So that's when it happens the most often, is when there's an actual public improvement. I don't know the last time I've heard of it being invoked for redevelopment. And then I get into questions about, our substance of our process. Where are we looking at redevelopment areas that kind of say, well, we haven't identified any, designated any so far, but we have, as talked about 5 different areas, and in the village, and I identify them broadly here. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing on that in our meeting here today in a second. And then I go into, well, what would we need to do to finalize these redevelopment areas? We have to do this blight determination that Michelle and I are going to get going on in earnest early next week. We talk about these conditions of quote unquote blight that are fairly broad. And then I say, well, okay, well, if my area is determined to be a qualifying redevelopment area, or, predominance of blighted property, does that mean I'm a redevelopment project there? And the answer is no. There's another step, and that is going to come up here in the fall. The CDA and the board would have to actually designate that area as a redevelopment project area, and they would consider not only whether it met the statutory minimum criteria, but also if there's other factors going on here. So just want to make sure that we're kind of communicating that this is a process. It's a very deliberate process, and we're just at the early kind of stage of it. So then, the question is, well, what if, later in this fall, the CDA and village board do designate a particular area as a redevelopment project area? Can redevelopment take place? And I just say, well, technically redevelopment can take place at any time. It doesn't need us to designate an area. If someone's zoned appropriately, they can sell their property and someone can propose a redevelopment plan at any time. But it really does signal us getting started on working on a plan for that area. What are the opportunities? How could redevelopment happen? Are we talking about a proposal to remove buildings and build new ones? Or are we just talking about sprucing up an area and providing facade improvement or home improvement money? All that stuff would still need to sort out. And as I mentioned, sort of a playbook for making that happen. The question again is, well, does the CDA go in sort of a dark room and prepare the redevelopment plans? And the answer is no, that we will be interviewing people. We'll be keeping everyone informed. As mentioned, we'll have an opportunity at each CDA meeting for public input. We're going to get that webpage activated. And we're required by law, in fact, to have a public hearing and notify each and every property owner within a designated redevelopment project area before the CDA and village board could adopt a plan for that area. So there's multiple checkpoints during the process here. And then I just have a couple of things. I mentioned CDA a lot, but I didn't sort of define them. So I just included some generic stuff on what is the CDA. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. Mercifully done at 3 pages, but I'm certainly welcome any initial comment. But again, I'll send this off to you today.
Can I offer one thing for us to check out? I received a question after we were talking about this at the village board, and I don't even remember who asked me, someone on the board. When we developed Village Hall area and we redeveloped that whole block, there were some older homes, and particularly one on the corner that had a barn behind it. It was the artists of there. Someone asked me if that was condemned or if we used eminent domain there. And I think we need to know the answer to that, because I think there was a lot of misinformation out there at the time we were doing all of that. And as members of the redevelopment or CDA or the board, we'd want to know that.
Well, I don't want to guess, but the guy Steve will know the answer to that. So I don't know, Michelle, if you want to ask Steve and.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think Rebecca has her hand up too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I like this document, by the way. It's quite helpful, and I can see it being quite useful. I liked how you brought out the fact that redevelopment is not necessarily bulldozing or taking over, saying you're screwed. Because I think there is a lot of misconception out in the public about what redevelopment is all about. And I think making sure the public is truly educated like this is going to be significant in gaining support for redevelopment efforts. And I think this is a good start for getting that good education out there.
Yeah, well, good. You know, and I provide a link to the statute so people can look at it. And, you know, if you've looked at it, the statute is pretty scary. I mean, as I mentioned before, it talks about slum clearance, it talks about condemnation, it talks about other things. So it enables a pretty broad, you know, list of things. It also, you know, the law requires fair compensation. It requires relocation expense if all these things are invoked. But, you know, it's fairly empowering. But, you know, again, the reality of what it is versus what it legally could be in the extreme are two different things. And I mean, you all are on the CDA or the board, village board, and you know how things are going to actually go down. And they're probably not going to go down by the village or CDA saying, we're taking this whole block and knocking it down. That's just not going to happen.
And as someone who did community development work in the late 60s and the 70s, that was common. And there are people who know that, I mean, when we were developing hospitals, they were developing interstates, they were dividing communities, and there were whole neighborhoods that were just taken, and communities were split. And so I think that is in the back of people's minds. It's not that ancient history. So we may want a multi-pronged public affairs approach to community education on this. Newspaper stuff on the website, talking to people, relying on some of our trustees to help share the information. I think that'll be important.
I think too.
On that same line, what is the process for relocating a business, Mark? If there's someone who agrees to sell their building and they lease several of the spaces to other businesses, what is that process? Can you just summarize that for me?
Yeah, I mean, if a private entity is involved in acquiring a site, you know, for redevelopment, they inherit a tenant, there's really no obligation for that private entity to do anything that's not, you know, prescribed in the lease. If the government is involved, then there is a responsibility for relocation of that business to kind of a like, you know, location in the community. But I can certainly add that as a question here, relocation.
Yeah. Could you expand on that just a little bit on that last part you were talking about? I mean, you say help them relocate. What do you mean by that? And I think that's because just kind of a nefarious, that's the wrong word I'm looking, you know, that ghostly kind of statement, just broad statement that says, oh, we're just going to help you. Well, what does that mean? You know,
yeah, there's actual money, there's cash, you know, contribution for relocation
okay.
that, you know, to find like space to actually pick up and move, to, you know, change addresses on, you know, business forms, all that sort of stuff. But what I will do though is research that question and make sure I've got a 100% informed answer.
Yeah, because Doug, that was a great question because, you know, there are businesses that are tenants. And like you said, when it's a private thing, I'm well aware of the real estate aspect of that, but I wasn't aware of the government side of things when that kind of stuff comes. So that I think a lot of people that'll be a good thing to clarify.
Yeah, well, I think it's true for businesses and for people who rent a house, you know, to know what their rights might be, as well. So, you know, and it's a balancing act between, you know, to how often do we want to, how often is that going to happen, you know, versus the fear that you create that it might happen. So you really have to kind of walk that line.
That's what I was thinking too, that, you know,
you really have to balance that with, because the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim. But if you put it in a Q&A or Q&R, it's kind of,
Oh, this must happen all the time.
Yeah.
So that's why
Yeah.
they put it in.
but it makes
Yeah.
sense to answer it. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense if people are asking that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just, it can be a simplified wording for it. In fact, it needs to be simplified. But yeah, just a little bit more specific than that initial broad statement you initially said. That was helpful just even to me. So.
My experience over the years has been that there are fewer that get forced into relocation and more that volunteer. I mean, found businesses that have been on the brink for a while, and they hear about an opportunity like this, and they'll come to Michelle or someone and say, I might want to participate.
Mhm. I like, Mark, how you really bring into the document that this is something that the community at large is really kind of asking for. I would say if there was something that was the top economic development desire of the community that we heard from the comp plan, but also just from what we hear, is to make downtown more vibrant, or so it's actually responding to community desire. And I like how you put that in there. I was surprised, I guess not surprised, but we heard it quite a bit at the comp plan, which was very interesting. Comp plan meetings.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm going to, this is almost a question, even both 10 and 11 are both questions that I want to run by Al, frankly, or, just to make sure that I'm legally correct, 100% correct. So
Okay.
I'll send this out probably without his response, but you see, I'm kind of hacking through a question 11 that sort of gets through to this relocation concern.
Good.
Any other thoughts? And otherwise we can move on. So, the idea is to get this thing done and build a web presence, I think within the next two weeks.
Absolutely, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Make sure I save that version.
Okay.
I don't know what's the next thing on the
Yeah,
agenda.
I was going to pull up our agenda. I believe that it is discuss method and process for blight determinations in prospective redevelopment areas.
Okay. So you'll remember that we've narrowed down to 5 candidate redevelopment areas, with one of them being fairly big in the northern part of the downtown Holem Education Center area. And so what we've done so far is, for each of these areas, this is a little spreadsheet, we've identified the properties that may comprise that area. I've cast in many cases a really broad net to make sure that I'm fully covering the area. I guess I try to draw an analogy, and it's like if you're making clothes, you don't want to just get barely enough, or boy, do we have enough to make this new thing. You want to buy a little bit more so you have some to spare. I don't know. That's a terrible analogy, because the only thing I've ever made was a vest and home ec in 7th grade, and it was terrible. But in any case, my point is, I've got more properties in here that will almost certainly appear in the redevelopment area for this Highway V bend, as I'm calling it, kind of euphemistically. As we talked about, we're focused on those, these properties that have the kind of the old farmstead issues. But I thought, while we're out here, I just want to walk up Trailside, where we got the duplexes and fourplexes, to just gauge the condition. I just don't have a strong feel from my brain as to what the condition of those areas are.
Mark, noticing as you were scrolling spreadsheet, it looked like a number of those trail sides might actually be renters instead of owner occupied. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's probably fair, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that,
I've been curious about for a while how many. This is a question I posed a while back about landlords in the village, and this is one possible way of finding out who some of them are and seeing if they're open to some of these, like the title or Section 8, whatever it's called, Section 18. Some of the stuff that we've been talking about over the past several months.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, definitely. I mean, it could be a database to help with that. So what we're going to do, and Michelle and I have a date planned on next Tuesday afternoon to kind of walk around and identify whether and which properties have any of the conditions that signify whether they're blighted or not. And so we'll just go through and, basically check a box if it has one of those conditions and add comments. We used to take photos of properties that before the days of Google Maps. The need to do that has gotten less, and we're a little less ominous when we're not taking pictures of everyone's property as well. So, but the idea is that we would just be walking around and identifying, these conditions on the properties and developing a database. And then the idea is we got to have this predominance of blight. So that means, practically speaking, predominance has meant at least 50% of the properties in any given area have one or more of these conditions. And so we'll kind of let the process guide us then in terms of whether this area or any area qualifies, and what would it take, I suppose, to make it qualify. If we find that these properties along trail side are just fine and don't have any conditions of blight, well, then that area will be lopped off, of the prospective redevelopment area. So, I know we're scheduled to meet again, not this Friday, but the Friday after. And my goal then would be to have this analysis completed by that Friday meeting so that the technical advisory committee could see it, what we came up with, and then we can start to identify recommendations for the CDA and village board as to, designating, whether it's all 5 of these redevelopment areas or a smaller group. And then we have to get down to what are the exact boundaries of each area that we're going to propose.
And Mark, we're actually scheduled for the 15th, not the 8th.
Well, that's great, because actually I didn't want to do it get it done in 3 days anyway.
I sent out a schedule with a few dates and no, I didn't get much feedback. I didn't get much feedback, so I was just going to start putting it on people's calendars. So that's what I was going to do. Is most of them are Friday. I think they're all Fridays except for today. So I'll start putting them on people's calendars.
Yeah, that works well, because then the CDA meeting is the 21st, the following Thursday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that'll give us some time to kind of clean up and prepare some maps and allow us discussion time to talk about things. And, one of the other things that this process does, I mean, our primary goal is to, look at these properties and click boxes if it makes sense based on our observations and our understanding of the law. But also, inevitably, we start to think about and talk about, well, what are the opportunities? And boy, if these 2 sites that, they're owned by the same individual could be combined, we could really have something big here. So that's the added advantage of, walking the area. So FYI, we'll let the cops know we're two people walking around.
I think that's great. And today is really nice weather. So let's hope for the same weather next week.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, this is fantastic, actually. Bottle this up. So that's where we're at on this process. And so I've got a tab for each one of them. As you can imagine, number 2 is very large and has a number of potential properties within it. And then the other ones get quite a bit smaller. For the Main Street corridor, I've kept it tight right along, Market Street. All these properties have frontage on Market Street, so that one we're keeping fairly tight. The Main South intersection, pretty darn simple. It's really the northern of the 2 larger commercial buildings at the end of South Street, where North and South is right now, and that vacant site that's half stormwater and half potential development site to its north. So then there should be a 5 here for Carroll. Oh, there it is. Yeah, and then the Carroll site. A little bit broader. Why did I make that one a little broader? Take a look at that. Oh, I had this notion of just taking a look at the sites that include Redline Mobile, but the residences to their west as well. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, honestly. And if it works out to exclude those, I'd say that's probably more likely than not. And I'm so glad that Redline's still in business. I was very concerned that, with the building of 51 and then the Quick Trip coming, that
Right.
that would make it difficult. But if they, for whatever reason, decided to hang it up there, it might be nice to have a good redevelopment concept for that area.
Communication with them?
No, so that's just it. So that might be, a bit of an opportunity. And if we have kind of some 50-50 choices like that, Jane, maybe that would warrant, giving a call to some of these owners before we toss them in a redevelopment area.
Yeah, I talked to him late last year about some COVID things related to alcohol that I needed to reach out to him about. And he was doing great, happy there, and, obviously affected by the Quick Trip and other things, but was doing pretty well. So it'd be great to reach out to him again.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I think he's done is address market opportunities. He added liquor. He's added more food. He's also, some of the seniors don't want to drive to where the Quick Trips are. It's just easier for them at the mobile. So I think he's working his market pretty well.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I don't know if there's anything else. I just, let me just rumble through these backwards now just to make sure I'm not. So this one, you remember, is fairly straightforward. And we're not talking about the building that includes the pick and save. This, as I mentioned, the Market Street area that we've got kind of bubbled out is extending basically, extending from the, come on, Mark, extending from the Old Depot on Market Street down, including the Chase properties, but then drawn pretty tightly along lands that just have some frontage on Market Street on the west side. And the area that we're investigating for our biggest site extends from the North Main intersection area all the way west to the restaurant. I've included in the investigation area this multiple family, these 8 units that are on the south side of Main Street, and extended down to Antique Lane, north of the bank, and then kind of pulled down along the railroad corridor, older industrial / storage businesses. This area preliminarily has the Holem Street corridor from the Norsky Nook, not including the Norsky Nook, but the lands from there east to the Holem Education Center. And then, as we discussed, we included the lands again for investigation along to Forest Street between the Holem Education Center and the park. So this is the kind of visual depiction of all the properties that we have on the list for number 2. And we already talked about the one that's the Bend site on V. Any questions or further comments before we move on to the next agenda item? And then I suspect we'll spend nearly all of our meeting in a week and a half talking about this.
If you want, Mark, I can go back to the agenda. I think we've pretty much covered everything, but we'll just check out. So we've reviewed the draft redevelopment Q&A, discussed method and process for blight determinations, and we pretty much discussed next steps, including designation of redevelopment areas and outreach plans. So I think we've covered that, unless anyone else wants to bring up anything on any of those items. If not, if there's, our next meeting is October 15th at 10 a.m. That's a Friday. So I will get all those on everyone's calendar that I sent out in a previous email, if that works for everybody. And then, yeah, does anybody have anything on these items, or do you want to move on to 6? On any other business that anyone has? Okay. This was great. We're moving
It's
forward.
been really helpful.
Yeah.
I really like this subcommittee. It's just, or whatever you want to call this.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah, I
tats.
don't necessarily call it a subcommittee. It's kind of a discussion group, but it's been really helpful.
Good. Okay.
I'll get this document out to you in the next couple minutes so you can look at it. And if you have comments, if you get back to me by Friday, that would be great.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'll get that on your calendars. Okay.
All right. Thank
Good.
you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one. Bye-bye.